right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to start getting ready for the next presentation. Next up, we have Dr. Julie Valentine from Brigham Young University. So Julie, it's great to see you again. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and take control of the screen, and then you're good to go.
We will get started. Wonderful to see virtually all of you. I'm going to be sharing some research findings, so have a snack or something if you need to stay awake, and so appreciate hearing from Dr. Speaker. He's just done amazing work in this world and grateful for this opportunity. I am a certified sexual assault nurse examiner with Wasatch Forensic Nurses. I'm an associate dean at Brigham Young University in the College of Nursing, and my focus area is research on sexual assault and criminal justice system response to sexual assault. And I'm going to share information with you on a retrospective study that we are doing on DNA analysis findings from sexual assault kits, and to talk about the implications on practice and policy, but also talk to you about we have a grant where we are a National Institute of Justice grant where we are developing a machine learning model on evidence selection for sexual assault kits. I also want to thank Dr. Sam Payne. He's also at Brigham Young University in Biostats department, and Dr. Leslie Miles, who is one of my research colleagues here. We have collaborators, Utah Bureau of Forensic Services, Idaho State Police Lab, so thank you, Matthew. And Bruce, if you're on, thanks to Bruce, Orange County Forensic Lab as well. And then our multitude of research assistants that have worked on this project with us through the years. So the study purpose is somewhat of a mouthful. We are looking to address the gap regarding sexual assault kit evidence selection protocols to establish some best practice guidelines for SAC evidence collection for analysis, and to develop a sexual assault kit evidence machine learning model software program. And Dr. Speaker talked about the application of machine learning model, and there's a publication that was from out of San Francisco regarding the effectiveness of this approach. So we have a few different aims, and I'm going to talk about these for the bulk of our presentation. The first is to evaluate decision-making protocols on DNA evidence contained in sexual assault kits, to develop these research-based guidelines, really evidence-based practice guidelines regarding which swabs and how many swabs should be tested. And I'm going to ask a couple questions to see in the group if you know in your jurisdiction's crime lab the approach that they might be taking on this. And then to develop and implement and evaluate a machine learning statistical model to guide forensic scientists within publicly funded forensic laboratories on the selection of the most probative swabs to analyze. And that is part 2. So the research steps, the first number that we look at, well, honestly, the very first number that we look at before this are submitted sexual assault kits. And this is where quite a bit of my research took place a few years ago in the state of Utah, and found that 38% of our collected sexual assault kits, all kits where the victim said they wanted to talk to law enforcement and prosecute their cases, 38% were submitted. We have since collaborated with law enforcement and also passed a bill that mandated the submission and testing of all sexual assault kits. So that's the first step. Then the next is we look at the percentage of sexual assault kits that develop full or partial STR-DNA profiles, which we term CODIS eligible profiles. So on partial, we count CODIS eligible profile if there's if it's a large enough profile to be able to go into CODIS. And then we're looking at the predicting variables for developing a fuller partial STR-DNA profile based upon variables that we collect from the sexual assault medical forensic examination forms. And this is a little bit different than the study that they did in San Francisco. They looked at variables that were from the case, but not inclusive of the examination forms that should be accompanying these sexual assault kits. One of the big areas that we're hoping that this research improves on as well is that there needs to be substantial collaboration between the forensic examiners and the forensic scientists, the crime lab, because we have those who are collecting the evidence and those who are analyzing the evidence. And understanding each other's processes, we feel will develop a much better product, meaning better results in our crime laboratories. We then, and this is the area that we're really focused on right now, is looking at the predicting variables based on swab location. And this is the next step in our development of the machine learning model. And that will move into the development of the machine learning model with specific swab probabilities. And then we're planning on testing this. We're hoping to test this in Utah, Idaho, and Orange County. So I'm going to share some of our initial findings on the first steps in this research. And these are all cases from Utah. We have been doing a lot of data collection in Idaho, but still need to finalize that data collection. And we have recently received about 1,400 cases from Orange County that we are working at transcribing into our database. As many of you know, to develop machine learning model, you need a lot of information, a lot of data. And so that's our next step as well. So we have 5,760 collected sexual assault kits, again, from victims from the age of 14 through our oldest patient was 93. I actually did that exam on our oldest patient in this study, the 93-year-old. And out of that 5,760 for these initial findings I'm sharing with you, 4,147 were sexual assault kits that were submitted to the crime lab. What we found is that 44% of submitted SACs develop full or partial CODIS-eligible STR-DNA profiles. When we looked at, they developed CODIS-eligible, meaning there was enough information to go into CODIS, enough alleles, 38% were entered into CODIS. So we randomly selected in Utah some of these cases that had a full or partial profile, but were not entered into CODIS, and then examined some of the reasoning for why these were not entered into CODIS. And here are some of the examples of which we found. And I think likely many of you know that there's some different interpretations possibly on the within states or publicly funded laboratories on what is entered into CODIS depending on that interpretation. So in Utah, we found that there were cases where the profile had not been entered into CODIS as no consensual sex partner standards submitted. And I will tell you about about 30% of our patients that we do a sexual assault medical forensic exam report a consent partner. So that number is pretty high. We also have cases where the foreign contributor DNA profile that did develop a full or partial CODIS-eligible profile was from an area of the body that was stated to be a consensual contact rather than a non-consensual body area. For example, if a victim said, well, he kissed my breast, and that part was okay, that I was okay with that. But then the vaginal penetration was a non-consensual act per the victim. And the DNA profile was developed from the breast swab that was not entered into CODIS because it was not an area from a non-consensual body area. So I'm hoping many of you are thinking, is this how we are interpreting things in our publicly funded lab? We also have some cases where law enforcement came back and said, we've deemed that no crime was committed, and those cases may not have been entered into CODIS as well. So quite a bit of still to sort out in this area. So I have a poll question for you. We're going to launch this poll. I'm curious, sexual assault medical forensic exams are reviewed by forensic analysts to inform DNA evidence and analysis decisions. And please answer based on your area, if that is all the time, most of the time, some of the time, rarely, and never. Because in my travels and doing presentations, I have found that there's some variation in this, and I'm curious for you listening.
Julie, the poll has launched. The answers are coming in. We're at about 45% participation right now,
Awesome.
but about half of the audience members are saying all the time. About 30% are in that most of the time category.
Okay, all right. That's really very, oh, here we go. Very helpful to know. And we do have a small percentage that are rarely and never combined. That's looks like that is 8%. And I'm hoping with the information that I'm going to share with you that you might consider that this information that comes from the forensic examiners can be very important in directing decision-making within the lab by the forensic scientists. So thank you for responding to that. All right, so our research question, our first research question, is what victim and sexual assault variables are statistically significant in predicting the development of CODIS-eligible STR-DNA profiles within sexual assault kits. So our outcome variable is development of CODIS-eligible STR-DNA profiles. And when we say CODIS-eligible, we're looking at both ENDIS, which is the national database CODIS system, or ESTIS, which is the state. And many of you likely are aware, the state, the requirements are not quite as strict, or the bar is not as high on the number of alleles that then can be, that are developed that then can go into the CODIS system. So we have another poll question for you. So, and I think we actually, when you see this, it might be a little bit different than what's listed here because we did not have space to list all of these. But I want you to think about, what do you think? What victim and sexual assault variables would be statistically significant in predicting or impacting the development of a CODIS-eligible STR-DNA profile? So go ahead and launch that poll, Tyler. So we've combined some of these. One is demographic information, the gender of the victim, age of the victim, race of the victim. Do you feel like that? And you can mark all that apply. Do you feel like that would be meaningful? The time between assault and exam, and if the victim bathed or showered, would that impact it? Ejaculation and what touched what. And I term it what touched what because when I work with patients and I get to that portion, this can be a hard part for the patients during the examination. And so I explained to them that I am working to collect the best evidence possible that's not their DNA. And so I need to be very clear about what touched what part of the other individual touched what part of their body. So the what touched what. And then injuries. Do you think injuries have any impact? Anogenital and non-anogenital or physical injuries. Strangulation. I have a whole study that we're doing just on strangulation because we have certainly seen a rise in the number of patients that report strangulation. When I first started this research in 2010, we were at about 10-11% of our rapes. Patients stated strangulation was involved, and now we're about at 21% in our 2020 cases. Consider if the victim has memory gaps of the assault. Also a victim with mental illness or victim reports unconsciousness during the assault. Would that have any bearing? Condom use, lubrication use. And we have gender of victim, age of victim, race of victim, 27%. Time between assault and examination, victim bathed or showered, that's high. Absolutely, 91%. Ejaculation and what touched what, 81%. Anogenital and non-anogenital, seen not as likely, 28%. Strangulation, 28%. The memory gaps, 31%. And is there more down there, Tyler, that I just can't see?
We have condom use, lubrication use at 61% and multiple suspects at 55%.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing
Absolutely.
that. All right, now we're going to get into what we have found in looking at a multitude of variables. Now, again, I'm going to refer that we are taking all of our variables from what we code from the sexual assault medical forensic exam. We code 284 variables from every one of the examination forms. So we have a massive amount of data to look at, and these are some of the variety of things that we have looked at. So the first thing is gender, and we found a huge difference related to gender. So females developed, and that's actually a typo, it's 38%. So 38% of females developed a CODIS eligible profile or a profile that was entered into CODIS. And males, we were only at 19%. I want you to think about anatomy differences because we think that that's exactly what we're seeing. For females, they have vaginas. And a vagina is a closed-in container you can think of in a way where it's more likely to hold on to that DNA. Now, for males, if there is rectal penetration, a rectum is still not as large, and we know that people have bowel movements, which moves things out of the rectum. And so we found a substantial difference between males' development of CODIS eligible profiles and females' development, so much so that we have now divided up our study and we are doing a female and a male and looking at the same, doing the same statistical analysis, but dividing that up based on the genitalia. We do have transgender patients represented, and we place them in this grouping for their genitalia at the time that we do the examination. So gender is a biggie, and we are working on a paper just looking at this male DNA issue. We then looked at age, and we found substantial finding also on age. As you can see, when you look at age, and there is, I just realized, I thought the research assistant had fixed this, that 10 on age, that should be a 14 because all of our cases start at the age of 14. So you can see that between the age of 14 and 30, we have about the same amount of development of a DNA profile. But, and these are all females, but we have found that as the female ages, we see a substantial drop in the development of a CODIS-eligible DNA profile from their sexual assault kit. We theorize, and we have not found this in the literature that anybody else has looked at or had these findings, and we're going to be very interested to look at our data from Orange County and Idaho if we have the same findings. But we theorize that when a female hits menopause, there's a drop in estrogen, and that drop changes the genital area of a female, and there are less secretions and changes in the genital tissue. And we think that those changes also mean that that tissue is less likely to hold on to the DNA. So pretty impressive findings, we felt like, on the age. So then we looked at bathing and showering. Out of our study findings so far, 37% of the female bathed between assault and exam. And I frequently am asked, why would people do that? Why would they bathe? And I will tell you, many patients, it's one of their first response that they will want to do. Even if they report 6 hours after the rape, they frequently will say, I had to shower, or I had to wash this off me, is often what they will say. And many times, they're not sure, what do I do with this? Do I report? Do I not report? And so, yeah, we have a high percent that bathed. We found that if they bathed or showered, it definitely dropped the development of a CODIS-eligible profile in half. As you can see, 21% developed a CODIS-eligible profile if they bathed or showered. But if they did not bathe or showered, we're at 42%. We looked at, there's a strong correlation between if they bathed or showered and the time between assault and exam, because if they wait a couple days or more, even 24 hours before they report, they frequently will be more likely to shower. Now, even though we have less 21% of bathing or showering, we developed a CODIS-eligible profile. We do have cases where we develop that CODIS-eligible profile, right, with bathing or showering. We have one case where the victim came in for an exam 76 hours, so more than 3 days after the sexual assault, and had showered and reported that that there was oral contact of the suspect on her neck, and the forensic nurse swabbed her neck and found that the neck and the vagina both developed a CODIS-eligible profile. When you think about it, necks for lots of people are a little bit wrinkly. And when you think about where are we going to find DNA hanging out, it might be in those folds or in that wrinklier skin, might hold on to it a little bit longer. Also, many patients will say that they bathed or showered and they might really wash their genital area, but they may not wash their neck area. So finding out, even if it's been a few days from the assault, and realizing that we still can get meaningful DNA from other areas of the body, especially with oral contact. So we also looked at, all right, what's the difference between external swabs? I talked about the neck swab, and internal swabs. And when the victim did bathe, this makes sense. The likelihood of external swabs producing CODIS eligibility was substantially lower than internal swabs. So external was 25% versus internal, such as that vaginal vault that holds onto that DNA at 38%. So then we want to look at, these are all victim and case statistically significant variables that were associated with more likely developing a CODIS eligible profile. And this was one of the things we asked about, strangulation. And out of our more than 4,000 cases, we have found that strangulation is more likely to develop, cases where there's strangulation is more likely to develop a CODIS eligible profile. I have a separate study that's just looking at strangulation. We've found that in strangulation cases, the victims are more likely to have both non-anogenital and anogenital injuries, and more likely to report not just strangulation, but being hit. They're just more overall, more violent assaults. And when you think about that in terms of the DNA, there's a lot more touching going on, likely with a violent assault. So we've found strangulation to be statistically significant. If the victim reports being grabbed or held, we found to be statistically significant in developing a CODIS eligible profile. Again, we're just getting more of that perpetrator's DNA as they, their hands grab or hold down a victim. But this is not necessarily looking just at touch DNA, but just DNA in general. We've found this to be statistically significant. A higher number of assaultive or penetrative acts. So we look at how many assaultive or penetrative acts. We code them based on fondling, one penetrative act, which could be for a female, vagina, mouth, or if there is non-consensual contact of the perpetrator's mouth on their DNA. And then for a male, it would be rectum and mouth, or if there is non-consensual oral contact of the perpetrator. So the more assaultive or penetrative acts, more likely to develop a CODIS eligible DNA profile. Ejaculation, absolutely. If we know that there's ejaculation, 47% develop a CODIS eligible profile, compared to if the victim says no, that the person did not ejaculate, we're at 26%. But I want to draw your attention to that unknown number. Out of our, and now we're at almost 10,000 cases, and this number has held the same. More than half of the victims, when you ask them, did the perpetrator ejaculate? They say, I don't know. And I want you to think of that as a sign of a non-consensual sexual act, because in consensual sex, most people are going to know if their partner ejaculated or orgasmed. But we have this high percent where they don't know, because when in the midst of a sexual assault, that is not something that a victim is going to be pondering or thinking about. Non-anogenital injury. We found that has been statistically significant. The more non-anogenital injuries, we're more likely to find DNA. Penile vaginal penetration, again, going back to the anatomy, the vagina, the vaginal vault, we feel is more likely to hold on to that DNA. And then oral contact. I think all of you are very aware that oral contact, great source of developing a DNA profile. Oral contact specifically of what we have found is if there's oral contact of the suspect on the genitals or breasts, we have a very high percentage of development of a DNA profile from breast swabs. So then we have looked at those variables that are less likely to develop a CODIS eligible profile. When the victim loses consciousness or awareness or reports loss of consciousness or awareness to the point where we ask them who was the perpetrator, and they say, I don't know. It's unknown. They were at a party and they wake up the next morning and they don't know where they are and their clothes are off. They don't know who did this to them. So this is different than stranger. This is the victim truly does not know. So that is correlated with full victim loss of consciousness or awareness. But we've also found that they're less likely to develop a CODIS eligible profile if they report loss of consciousness or awareness at all, because they're less likely to be able to tell us all the what touched what. And that's a high number. We have found 48% of victims say yes to loss of consciousness or awareness. And that's another study we're doing. We've found that that is loss of consciousness or awareness is associated with being strangled, drug-facilitated assault, and victim alcohol use. But our model only accounts for about 75% of those cases. So we think about a quarter of those cases, it's actually due to the trauma. They just don't remember things and they report these moments of loss of awareness. Suspected drug facilitated, again, that's correlated with victims' loss of consciousness. And condom use. If they report, yes, a condom was used, or no, as you can see, if they know, then that is 31%. But only 10% of victims say yes, that a condom was used. Many say no, there was no condom use. We have about 30% that say they don't know if there was condom use. The American College Health Association does a survey every year, and they have found that condom use in college students for consensual sex is about 48%. It's the highest form of birth control used. So when you compare 10%, I think lack of condom use also is a sign of a non-consensual sexual act. Multiple suspects. We find in multiple suspects that there's more often times a complex mixture, which can be harder to discern. So other things that we've looked at are crime lab statistically significant variables. And as you can see here, we found that the number of items tested, the more items tested or more swabs tested, increase the development of a CODIS eligible profile. We also looked at STR DNA kit use, but I'm sharing this, but I'm qualifying this that there's a lot of factors, so I don't think this is meaningful based on the test. We found that ID plus 70% developed a CODIS eligible profile versus global filer. But ID plus was used in Utah in 2010 to 2014. And that was when they were doing serology first, and kits were being or moving forward in testing if there were positive serology tests. So we think there's other factors that is not relating to the tests themselves. So another poll question. So this data that I've shared with you on some of our predictors that we found for developing CODIS eligible profile, in what areas of practice and policy do you feel that these findings are meaningful for evidence collection, for the sexual assault exam documentation, for evidence selection, for evidence analysis, investigation of sexual assault cases, prosecution of cases, victim survivor support resources, and mark all that apply that you think this information can be meaningful.
The results are coming in. We're climbing to about 20% right now, so we'll give everybody a couple seconds to fill out their perspective.
Whenever you do research, you have to ask two important questions. So what And now what? The now what is now what do we do with this? So this question, this poll question kind of lends itself to the now what? Is this meaningful? And if so, what areas is it meaningful in, do you see?
We were at about 51% participation rate, and it dropped off. So there are the results.
All right, great. I love these results because I agree. I think, and many of you selected quite a few of these, and I agree that probably less impactful in victim survivor support resources. But I think that these findings do help to inform practice and policy in many levels as an interdisciplinary collaboration. So thank you, Tyler. So next steps, where we are. We will be scheduling with Matthew after managing all this COVID craziness with being a professor. It's been a little crazy, but we're going to be going back to Idaho to finish up our data entry. We have received the cases from Orange County and from forensic nurse specialists in Orange County. So huge thanks to Bruce and Melinda for that, and we'll be working on that. And then we're going to be looking at completing the same data analysis on those other cases and comparing them to what we're seeing in Utah and then combining them. We also have discussed with Utah Bureau of Forensic Services that gathering data on 6 months of cases where they move to a test all. So the cases that I shared with you, Utah Bureau of Forensic Services, like many publicly funded crime labs, has been doing selected swabs. So picking those swabs that they feel would be most probative and moving those swabs forward and doing quant, and then basing on quant, moving the next step to DNA. So again, these are the next steps in our data analysis. And I want to talk a little bit about machine learning model and what we're really talking about and what we envision this might look like. Our goal is to develop a product, if it works, that would just, it would be a free product, a machine learning product that could help with the throughput in forensic laboratories. And we envision that the readout would be something sort of like this, is it would take, with machine learning, it's going to take all these different factors, that the information that accompanies the sexual assault medical forensic exam form, and it would take all of those that are statistically significant, and then it would give a probability of developing a CODIS eligible profile by swab. So you can see on this example here, for this example case, the vaginal vault, there's a 77% likelihood of developing a CODIS eligible profile. The perianal or vaginal vestibule drops to 63, anus, rectum, breast, and then oral. One of the challenges has been that, and here's where the National Institute of Justice comes in, and the idea of a standardized national kit is that we still have some differences on how these swabs are defined, or how they, where exactly the swabs are collected and how many swabs are collected. And I'm sure many of you are aware the National Institute of Justice SAFER recommendations were to reduce the number of swabs collected. Rather than 4 vaginal vault swabs, we're now, and a cervical swab and 2 cervical swabs. So prior to the NIJ National Best Practices, it was 6 swabs taken from the vaginal vault area. Now we concentrate that, and the recommendation is to 2 that would collect from the cervix and also the posterior fornix of the vaginal vault. So that's one of the challenges in developing this that we are addressing. So last poll question: what statements best describe, and I'm not able to fully read that right now.
Okay, I have it, Julie.
Okay, thank you, Tyler.
Yep. What statements best describe your jurisdiction's publicly funded crime laboratory's approach regarding SAC evidence testing?
And I asked this question, I think it's important to know this.
Absolutely. All right. Yep, we got to 52%, so we'll go ahead and share the results.
So we do have the higher percentage that I don't know this information. So, you know, as an interdisciplinary partnership, which is really the way that we have to address these sexual assault issues and reduce sexual violence in our communities and do the best on these kits. I think that this is worth a conversation in your communities or your jurisdiction, so you do know this information. So the next is 27% all swabs move forward in initial testing. 18% swabs are selected for initial testing based upon case information, that selected swab approach. Not all potentially probative swabs move forward to DNA as those deemed most likely to only move forward. That's 10% of initial swabs do not yield probative findings, and additional swabs or evidence are tested, and that's 14%. And I completely recognize that much of this is dependent upon the resources for your crime labs, and so many crime labs are resource strapped or challenged. So, all right, thank you, Tyler. We do have one other research question that we're looking at, and that is doing what differences exist between forensic scientists in the selection and prioritization of SAC swabs for analysis. So we are doing case studies, and what we'd like to do, if there's interest, is send this out to many forensic labs and have them look at these case studies, which are actually going to be real cases, and rank them as to which swabs they think would be most likely to develop a probative CODIS eligible profile. And then we'll evaluate inter-rater reliability. Are we all choosing the same things, or is there differences? And this can be looked at within each forensic laboratory. This is my contact information. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Do you want me to stop share at this point, Tyler?
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we will we'll transition to Matthew to moderate the question and answer session.
Julie, we have a lot of great questions coming in. We'll take some now, and then we'll probably forward some to the end, just in the interest of time. But we're talking, Tani emailed in with a question and wanted to know, now that more labs are moving to more of a strategy of Y-screen type technologies, how are you assessing swabs that contain saliva, and what are you seeing as labs transition more to that from traditional screening to more of a Y screen?
So all the labs that we're working with right now, all three of those, are doing the direct to DNA. So they're not doing serology first, but we do have data in Utah on those earlier cases where they did serology first. And we're finding that on those cases where there was a positive serology, yet they were more likely because they didn't test the other ones. But the first thing that we look at is the findings from the Y screen or the quant male DNA. And we look at which swabs produce that. And then we look at and how many of those swabs end up funneling through to doing STR-DNA testing. So we have looked at those kits that were in that time that we were doing serology first, and then the kits afterwards. And we don't think that there's the findings that we have do not support doing serology first, that doing the direct to DNA approach helps with throughput. I know that there are some that for pediatric or the juvenile cases are doing serology first. And I think we just need more evidence on this. We're trying to establish evidence-based practice and recommendations, best practice recommendations. So we need more research. We need more data.
Great answer. So one other question that's coming in related to your longevity study, the age of the victim and the collection over the age of the victim. Question about the age of the suspect in those cases. Did you consider that, and maybe possible vasectomies and lower sperm counts, things like that?
Right. I wish I had that data. The challenge with only having the data from the sexual assault medical forensic exam, which is the form that comes in with the kit, right, is that we don't ask that. So that's not part of the variables that we are looking at. And I don't know how many crime labs would have that information if they had the report from the police. My guess is that that would be a meaningful variable. We just don't have it to factor in.
That's one of the questions I remember you asking me, if we had access to the law enforcement reports. How much do you rely on those reports as you're doing this coding?
Only in Idaho, because we look at those reports, and maybe we should start to look at the age of the suspect. We haven't been coding that because in Utah, we just are going on the sexual assault medical forensic exam. But I think that probably would be somewhat meaningful. I don't know if it would be as impactful or meaningful as what we're finding on the victims.
Very interesting. And Deb and I are sitting here writing furiously as you're talking. So this is a great learning experience for all of us. Another question coming in, this time from Lisa, talking about multiple factors as it relates to CODIS profiles and CODIS eligibility. What are your thoughts there? Did you consider that?
I guess, what are the multiple factors? I'm not quite sure, Claire. Do you?
Sure. I think they're talking about, let's see, I'll read the question directly. Did you see that for some of the variables tested that there were multiple factors involved in obtaining the CODIS profile, i.e. age and condom used? And how did you account for multiple factors in the same case?
Oh, gotcha. That's what the machine learning is going to do. And that's the exciting thing about the machine learning. So we've done logistic regression analysis on this, but the next step is the machine learning model. And as we develop that, that's exactly what it can do, is it takes all those factors and will pull all that data from this multitude of factors to develop the probability.
A question coming in about research that's available. So may we link or have info for any papers related to menopause estrogen effect on generating DNA profiles? Has that data been published?
Oh man, I so wish it had been published already. We are like really getting close to getting it submitted. COVID has derailed many of my plans on this, but we are hoping to get that submitted ASAP because a bulk of it's already written. So the findings that I shared with you today, that's our first paper. Then our next paper is the same thing, but on males. And then our next is going into the development of the machine learning models. So right now we have a 3-step paper that just need more hours in the day, right? But we're hoping to get it out soon.
You make fantastic use of the hours in the day that you have. Your publications are very informative, and you're a prolific publisher. We appreciate all of your hard work. Question coming in from Matthew: why was CODIS eligibility used as a threshold? Was consideration given to autosomal profiles that aren't CODIS worthy, but are certainly suitable for inclusion exclusion and YSTR data?
That's a great question. The bulk of our cases are from Utah, and we have very few cases where they did YSTR, and the outcome variable as a CODIS eligible profile we chose because for our research grant, because we've kind of felt that that's the gold star, since YSTR can be meaningful, but not as meaningful if you can develop a profile to put it into CODIS, meaning, you know, many times there's a hold on doing YSTR unless they have a potential suspects, buccal swab as well. So we made the decision, since we don't have a lot of cases with YSTR, that that was our outcome variable.
Fantastic. We have time for one or two more questions here. So do you have any data about swabs being negative, but other evidence such as clothing and bedding producing a profile?
I wish I had more of this as well. What we've found is as many publicly funded laboratories, our state laboratory in Utah has done phenomenal work we were almost at 23 months between if a kit was submitted and development of the findings. And now we're at like 25 days. But to get there, there was really a focus on the throughput on the kits and to focus on the swabs. And remember, I don't have data for under the age of 14. So in those pediatric cases, they're more likely to test bedding or other items besides the swabs, because we've seen that to be very meaningful or more meaningful in some ways. But we only have, gosh, maybe about 20 cases where I have data on the underwear. I have a handful where there was a tampon or pad that was tested, but I just do not have very much data. And looking at Orange County and Idaho, we're getting a little bit more, but I think overall, and Matthew, you might have more input on this too, I think that really the push has been what's going to be the most meaningful to test in these adolescent and adult cases. And the focus has really been on the swab. So I'd love to have more data on that. Hopefully we will in time.
Certainly, I think we're probably more focused on the kits themselves. That's probably going to be our best evidence. And certainly that's where we're going to start. We generally don't start going to bedding and clothing unless there's another question that we need to answer, or if we didn't answer the question with the sexual assault kit. So I think your research is focused in the right area, at least for our state and for us and what we're doing with the DNA. Julie, I teased earlier a little bit about your research that you're doing, and I don't think it's published yet, but on dating apps and what you're seeing in the sexual assault kit data. I know you weren't present for that, but can you give us a little bit of a teaser on what you're going to publish there?
Yeah, and that I've had a lot of interest. So that article kind of bumped to the top, and that's getting submitted next week or maybe Friday. We have found that we looked at from 2017 to 2020 in Utah, we looked at cases that we are calling DAPSA cases, dating app facilitated sexual assault cases. And we have 274. There's just not much published on this at all. The next study is a study of 11 out of Australia. But out of these 274 cases where the victims met on a dating app and they were raped at the initial in-person meeting, we have found high rates of strangulation, much higher injury rates, both non-anogenital and anogenital injuries. We've found that the victims have higher rates of mental illness, and this is any degree of mental illness. So overall, our findings have been more vulnerable victims in the dating app and more violent predators. And our premise is that violent perpetrators use these dating apps as hunting grounds. And but we also know that a lot of great couples are found through dating apps, and there can be good out of dating apps. So what we don't want to happen is for these findings to shift the blame onto victims, that they shouldn't be using dating apps because then they're not going to report, right? We really want we're writing this as a systems approach. And what do we need to look at within the dating app companies themselves to make these safer environments? So hopefully this will be out soon.
It's fantastic research. I think it's really going to help us. It's generated a lot of discussion, at least in our state, and I think even online, just teasing that has generated a lot of discussion. So we look forward to that publication. We appreciate your presentation today, and hope you're able to stick with us for the panel discussion a little bit later. So
I'll be back. I have to teach a class, but then I'll be back.
Fantastic. Okay. Appreciate your time today. And Tyler, we'll kick it back to you.